Wyoming Territory, 1876. A time when fortune-seekers rushed west with dreams glittering like gold dust in their eyes. A time when a woman's worth was measured by the contents of her trunk and the lineage of her family. And a time when Catherine Montgomery, with her threadbare carpet bag and faded cotton dress, would be deemed unacceptable by a man who had judged her worth in dollars before ever meeting her face to face. But destiny weaves curious patterns in the tapestry of life, even when the threads appear frayed beyond repair, even when all that remains is a crumpled letter of rejection, a near-empty purse, and the bitter wind of the high plains as sole witness to a woman's shattered hopes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Black Hills Express rattled across the Wyoming countryside, its iron wheels beating a relentless rhythm against the rails. Inside the third-class carriage, Catherine Montgomery pressed her forehead against the window glass, watching as the landscape transformed from the gentle rolling prairies into the jagged, pine-covered mountains of the Western Territory. A land so vast and untamed it swallowed people whole, she'd heard. A perfect place to disappear or to become someone new. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Honey-blonde hair pinned severely beneath a practical bonnet. Blue eyes shadowed with exhaustion, and skin that had once been considered her finest feature, now pale from weeks of poor sleep and meager meals. At 28, Catherine was painfully aware that she was neither young enough to be considered a prime marriage prospect, nor old enough to be comfortably settled into spinsterhood. Next stop, Prosperity Junction, 20 minutes only. The conductor bellowed as he passed through the car. Catherine straightened, smoothing down her skirts, the best dress she owned, though the hem was nearly threadbare and the once vibrant blue had faded to the color of a winter sky. Her hands trembled slightly as she retrieved the letter from her reticule, the paper soft from countless readings. "Dear Miss Montgomery, I await your arrival with anticipation. As discussed in our correspondence, I believe we can forge a mutually beneficial partnership. You will find Prosperity Junction a growing community with opportunities for a woman of education and refinement. I have secured you lodging at Mrs. Whitaker's boarding house until our wedding can be arranged. Regards, Bartholomew Kensington." The letter was brief, businesslike, much like the 6 months of correspondence that had preceded it. Catherine had answered Bartholomew Kensington's advertisement in the Boston Chronicle almost on a whim, or perhaps out of desperation after her father's death had left her with nothing but debts and painful memories. Successful businessman in Wyoming Territory seeks educated Eastern lady of good character for matrimony. Must be willing to relocate immediately. Send correspondence and daguerreotype to... Catherine had sent a letter but no photograph. She had none to send, and truthfully feared rejection if he saw her plain features before reading her carefully composed words. Instead, she'd written of her education, her skills in household management, her ability with numbers and languages. She had crafted herself in ink as a woman of substance, if not of beauty or wealth. The train began to slow, the brakes screeching in protest as Prosperity Junction came into view. The settlement was larger than Catherine had expected, a proper town rather than the cluster of rough buildings she'd imagined. A church steeple rose above the pines, and a main street lined with wooden buildings stretched to meet the horizon. In the distance, the mountains loomed, their peaks still capped with snow despite the late spring thaw. Catherine gathered her carpet bag and the small trunk that contained everything she'd managed to salvage from her former life. 2 changes of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, a collection of books, and her father's pocket watch, the one thing she couldn't bear to sell despite its value. The platform was crowded with travelers and townspeople alike. Catherine scanned the faces, looking for a man who might be Bartholomew Kensington. In his last letter, he had described himself as of average height, with a distinguished bearing. Whatever that might mean, she saw no one who appeared to be searching for her. Miss Montgomery? A boy of perhaps 12 appeared at her elbow, cap pulled low over unruly dark hair. "You the lady from Boston?" "Yes," Catherine replied, relief washing through her. "Has Mr. Kensington sent you?" The boy nodded, though something in his expression gave Catherine pause. "Yes, I'm to take you to Mrs. Whittaker's. Mr. Kensington left a message for you there." "Left a message? He isn't here to meet me himself." Catherine felt a prickle of unease. "No, ma'am. He had business in the next county. Said it couldn't wait." The boy reached for her trunk. "I'm Jimmy, by the way, Jimmy Hayes. My pa runs the livery." Catherine followed Jimmy through the bustling streets of Prosperity Junction, taking in the sights and sounds of what would soon be her home. The town hummed with activity, miners with weathered faces and dust-covered clothes, merchants hawking their wares, women in calico dresses hurrying on errands. The air smelled of pine, dust, and wood smoke, so different from the coal-choked atmosphere of Boston. Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house stood on a side street, a two-story structure painted a cheerful yellow with white trim and a neat garden surrounding. The sign hanging beside the door read simply, "Whittaker's Clean Rooms, Good Meals." Jimmy deposited Catherine's trunk on the porch. "Mrs. Whittaker's expecting you," he said, shuffling his feet. "I better get back to the livery before Pa misses me." Catherine pressed a penny into the boy's hand, one of her precious few remaining coins. "Thank you, Jimmy." The door opened before Catherine could knock, revealing a plump woman of middle years with iron-grey hair pulled into a severe bun and keen eyes that missed nothing. "You'll be Miss Montgomery, I expect," she said, her gaze taking in Catherine's travel-worn appearance and meagre belongings with a single sweep. "Yes, ma'am. I understand Mr. Kensington has arranged lodging for me here." Mrs. Whittaker's expression softened slightly. "Come in, dear. You look dead on your feet." She stepped aside to allow Catherine entrance. "I've put you in the blue room, upstairs. It's small but gets nice morning light." The interior of the boarding house was clean and modestly furnished, smelling pleasantly of beeswax polish and fresh bread. Catherine followed Mrs. Whittaker up a narrow staircase, each step feeling heavier than the last as exhaustion caught up with her. "Here we are," Mrs. Whittaker said, opening a door to reveal a small but tidy room with a brass bedstead, a washstand, and a pine dresser. Blue and white curtains framed the window, which overlooked the garden at the back of the house. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. You'll share with Miss Winslow, the schoolteacher, and Mrs. Palmer, who does seamstress work, both respectable ladies. "It's lovely," Catherine said sincerely. After weeks of train travel and cheap lodging houses, the simple room seemed like luxury. "Mr. Kensington left a message for me." Mrs. Whittaker's expression changed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Yes, there's a letter for you downstairs. I thought you might want to freshen up first before reading it." Something in the landlady's tone sent a chill through Catherine. "I'd prefer to read it now, if you don't mind." Mrs. Whittaker hesitated, then nodded. "I'll fetch it. You sit down before you fall down, girl." Left alone, Catherine sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to quiet the sudden hammering of her heart. Why would Bartholomew leave a letter rather than meet her? Why did Mrs. Whittaker look at her with what seemed suspiciously like pity? The landlady returned moments later, a cream-colored envelope in her hand. "Here it is. I'll leave you to your and privacy. Supper's at 6 sharp if you're feeling up to joining us." When the door closed behind Mrs. Whittaker, Catherine stared at the envelope for a long moment before breaking the seal with trembling fingers. "Miss Montgomery, it is with regret that I must inform you our arrangement can no longer proceed as planned. Upon inquiries made about your arrival, I learned certain details regarding your financial circumstances that were not disclosed in our correspondence. Prosperity Junction is a town of ambition and growth. My position as president of the Territorial Bank requires a wife of means and social standing who can assist in securing connections with Eastern investors. Your lack of dowry and apparent destitution make you unsuitable for the role I had envisioned. I have paid for 2 weeks' lodging at Mrs. Whitaker's to allow you time to make alternative arrangements, perhaps as a housekeeper or seamstress, if your skills are as you described. I wish you success in your future endeavours, Bartholomew Kensington. The words blurred as tears filled Catherine's eyes. She had travelled over 2,000 miles, spent nearly every penny she possessed, left behind everything familiar, only to be dismissed without even the courtesy of a face-to-face meeting. Rejected not for any flaw in her character or person, but for the simple crime of being poor. A hot wave of shame washed over her, followed quickly by anger. She had never claimed to be wealthy. She had emphasized her education, her skills, her willingness to work alongside a husband to build a life. If Bartholomew Kensington had wanted an heiress, he should have specified that in his advertisement. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Hastily wiping her eyes, Catherine called, "Yes?" Mrs. Whitaker entered carrying a tray with tea and sandwiches. Her expression, as she took in Catherine's tear-streaked face, confirmed that she knew the contents of the letter. "Thought you might need something to steady you," the older woman said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "Kensington's a fool and worse, but that's neither here nor there now." "You knew what the letter said," Catherine said, not a question. Mrs. Whitaker sighed, settling her substantial frame into the room's single chair. "Word travels in small towns, especially when it comes from the bank president's own mouth. He was in here yesterday, making arrangements for your stay, telling me not to expect a wedding after all." Her eyes, kind but shrewd, assessed Catherine. "What will you do now, Miss Montgomery?" Catherine looked down at the letter still clutched in her hand. 2 weeks' lodging, a strange town, no connections, no prospects, and barely enough money to buy a return ticket east, though there was nothing and no one waiting for her there either. "I don't know," she admitted, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "I suppose I'll need to find work." Mrs. Whitaker nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. No use crying over men like Bartholomew Kensington. Prosperity Junction has its share of hard people, but there are good ones too." She rose to her feet with surprising grace for a woman of her size. "Rest now. Things often look clearer after sleep and a hot meal." As Mrs. Whitaker reached the door, Catherine found her voice again. "Thank you for your kindness." The older woman turned, her expression softening. "We women have to look out for each other out here, Miss Montgomery. The West can be cruel, but it can also offer second chances to those brave enough to seize them." After Mrs. Whitaker left, Catherine moved to the window, gazing out at the unfamiliar landscape. The mountains rose in the distance, indifferent to human concerns, while below in the garden, spring flowers pushed defiantly through the soil. Survival despite harsh conditions. Perhaps there was a lesson there. She unfolded the letter again, reading it one final time before tearing it into tiny pieces and letting them flutter into the wastepaper basket. 2 weeks to determine her fate. 2 weeks to prove that Catherine Montgomery was made of sterner stuff than Bartholomew Kensington could possibly imagine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning sun streamed through the blue curtains, painting Catherine's small room in golden light. For a moment, disoriented from sleep, she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back with painful clarity. Prosperity Junction. Bartholomew Kensington's rejection. 2 weeks to find her way. She rose and dressed methodically, choosing her second-best dress, a grey cotton with minimal embellishment that had once belonged to her mother and had been carefully altered to fit her slimmer frame. If she was to seek employment today, she needed to appear respectable, if not fashionable. The aroma of coffee and fresh bread drew her downstairs to the boarding house dining room, where 3 women were already seated around a large oak table. Mrs. Whittaker emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of eggs and bacon. "Good morning, Miss Montgomery," the landlady said cheerfully. "Come meet your fellow boarders. Ladies, this is Miss Catherine Montgomery, newly arrived from Boston." A tall, angular woman with spectacles and iron-grey hair nodded. "Margaret Winslow. I teach at our school." Her accent marked her as another Easterner, perhaps from New York or Philadelphia. Beside her, a plump, rosy-cheeked woman offered a warm smile. "Eleanor Palmer. I do seamstress work for half the town and gossip for free." Her drawl suggested Southern origins. The third woman, younger than the others, with striking auburn hair and a smattering of freckles across her nose, extended her hand. "Clara Jenkins. I clerk at Hawkins Mercantile. Don't mind my hands. Always." Inky from the ledgers, Catherine took her seat, overwhelmed by the friendly welcome. "Thank you all. I'm pleased to meet you." Mrs. Whittaker placed a cup of steaming coffee before Catherine. "Eat hearty, girl. You'll need your strength." As breakfast progressed, Catherine found herself the object of gentle curiosity. These women were too well-mannered to ask directly about her situation, but she sensed their awareness of her circumstances, small towns, and their efficient telegraph of whispers. "I understand you're seeking employment, Miss Montgomery?" Miss Winslow inquired finally, her tone neutral. Catherine nodded, swallowing a bite of buttered bread. "Yes, I have experience as a bookkeeper for my father's business, and I'm fluent in French and passable in German. I can also sew, though not with Mrs. Palmer's expertise, I'm sure." Mrs. Palmer chuckled. "Don't worry, dear. There's enough mending in this town to keep 3 seamstresses busy, especially with all the miners tearing their clothes on every rock and branch they encounter." "Bookkeeping, you say?" Clara leaned forward, interest lighting her features. "Mr. Hawkins just mentioned yesterday he's drowning in paperwork since the mine expanded operations. He might welcome someone with your skills." Hope flickered in Catherine's chest. "That would be wonderful. Would you be willing to introduce me?" "Better than that," Clara said, rising from her seat. "I'll take you there myself after breakfast. My shift starts at 8. An hour later, Catherine found herself standing in Hawkins Mercantile, a cavernous establishment that seemed to stock everything a frontier town might require. Tools hung from the ceiling, barrels of flour and sugar lined one wall, and shelves overflowed with canned goods, fabrics, and sundries of all descriptions. The air smelled of coffee, leather, and the sharp tang of tobacco. Ezra Hawkins himself proved to be a stout man of about 60, with bushy white whiskers and shrewd eyes that assessed Catherine's worth as efficiently as they might evaluate a shipment of goods. "Bookkeeping, eh?" he said after Clara had made the introductions. "What experience do you have specifically?" "My father owned an import business in Boston," Catherine replied, maintaining eye contact despite her nervousness. "I managed the accounts for 5 years before his passing. I'm familiar with double-entry bookkeeping, inventory management, and currency conversion." Hawkins grunted, neither impressed nor dismissive. "Can you cipher quickly without paper?" "Yes." "Sir, if I buy goods at $12 per gross and sell them at 15 cents each, what's my profit margin?" Catherine calculated rapidly. 30%, assuming a gross is 12 dozen units. A flicker of surprise crossed Hawkins' face. "That's correct. One more. If a miner buys supplies on credit at 18% annual interest and makes payments of $10 monthly on a balance of $150, how long until he's paid in full?" This required more thought, but Catherine worked through it methodically. "Approximately 18 months, sir, assuming he doesn't add new purchases to his account." Hawkins exchanged a glance with Clara, who smiled encouragingly. "Well, Miss Montgomery, it seems you do know your figures. I could use help 3 days a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. 7 hours each day at 60 cents per day. There's a small room behind the store you can use as an office. The wage was modest, but fair, more than she would earn as a seamstress or laundress. That would be most satisfactory, Mr. Hawkins. When would you like me to begin? How about right now? Clara can show you the ledgers. They're in a frightful state, I'm afraid. By midday, Catherine understood the magnitude of the task before her. Hawkins's bookkeeping system was chaotic at best, non-existent at worst. Transactions were recorded haphazardly. Inventory was tracked by memory rather than documentation, and the credit accounts, of which there were dozens, were a tangled mess of partial payments and unclear balances. "I'm sorry it's such a muddle," Clara said, bringing Catherine a cup of tea as she sat surrounded by ledgers and loose papers. "Mr. Hawkins is a fine merchant, but has little patience for paperwork." "It's a challenge, certainly," Catherine agreed, "but not insurmountable. With a proper system in place, this could all be managed much more efficiently." Clara perched on the edge of the desk. "You know, you're nothing like what people expected." Catherine looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Well, when word got around that Bartholomew Kensington had sent for a bride from Boston, people had certain expectations. A delicate society lady who'd faint at the sight of mud or mining equipment." Clara's freckled face broke into a grin. "Instead, you get rejected by that stuffed shirt and immediately set about finding proper work. It's caused quite a stir." Heat rose to Catherine's cheeks. "I had no idea I was the subject of such speculation." "Oh, honey, in a town this size, a new face is always news, especially a pretty one. And when that face belongs to a woman with education and manners who was supposed to marry the most pompous man in the territory." Clara laughed. "Why, that's better entertainment than a traveling show." Before Catherine could respond, the bell above the store's entrance jangled. Clara straightened, professional demeanor returning instantly. "That'll be the midday rush," she said. "Miners coming in for supplies before the afternoon shift. Holler if you need anything." Left alone with the chaotic accounts, Catherine buried herself in work. There was something soothing in the ordered precision of numbers after the emotional turmoil of recent days. Here was a problem she could solve, a situation she could control through logic and diligence. She was so absorbed that she barely registered the commotion in the main store, the raised voices, the heavy tread of boots on wooden floors, the occasional burst of raucous laughter. The mining town's rhythm was foreign to her still, but not unpleasant. "Miss, might I trouble you for assistance?" The voice, deep and coloured with an accent she couldn't quite place. Irish, perhaps, but tempered by years in America, startled Catherine from her concentration. She looked up to find a man standing in the doorway of her small office, hat in hand. He was tall, broad-shouldered without being bulky, with features that spoke of long exposure to the elements. Tanned skin, faint lines around eyes that were a startling shade of green, like sun-dappled forest pools. His clothes were of good quality, but worn with the casual comfort of a man who valued function over fashion. A miner, she guessed, but not an ordinary one. "I apologize for the intrusion," he continued when she didn't immediately respond. "Clara mentioned there was a new bookkeeper who might help with a business matter." Catherine gathered her composure. "Of course. How may I assist you, Mr. Sullivan, Liam Sullivan?" He stepped further into the office, his presence somehow making the small space seem even smaller. "I need to arrange credit for some specialized equipment. Mr. Hawkins suggested you might help with the paperwork." "Certainly." Catherine gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Please sit down and we can discuss the details." Sullivan settled his frame into the chair with surprising grace for a man his size. "You're new to Prosperity Junction," he observed. "Not a question, but a statement. Yes, I arrived yesterday from Boston." Catherine kept her tone professional, unwilling to invite personal questions or, worse, pity. Something flickered in Sullivan's eyes, interest perhaps, or simple curiosity. That's quite a journey. Most Easterners who venture this far west are either running from something or chasing a dream. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Sometimes both. Catherine met his gaze directly. I suppose I fall into the latter category, Mr. Sullivan. Now, about this equipment credit, what specifically are you looking to purchase? If he was disappointed by her redirection to business matters, he didn't show it. Instead, he pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket and spread it on the desk between them. A hydraulic monitor and sluice system, he explained. For more efficient gold extraction from the placer deposits in Thunder Creek. Catherine examined the specifications, impressed despite herself. This was no small-scale prospecting equipment, but industrial machinery worth a small fortune. This is a substantial investment, she noted. Are you purchasing as an individual or on behalf of a company? On behalf of the Thunder Creek Mining Cooperative, Sullivan replied. We're 5 partners with equal stakes. I've been authorized to arrange financing. As Catherine began preparing the necessary documentation, she couldn't help noticing that Sullivan's hands, while bearing the calluses and small scars of physical labor, were also unexpectedly well kept for a miner. Similarly, his speech pattern shifted between frontier directness and something more educated. You seem surprised, Miss Montgomery, Sullivan observed, catching her appraisal. Catherine blinked, embarrassed at being caught studying him. I apologize. I was just... Forgive me, but you don't quite fit my preconception of a miner. To her, relief. He laughed, a rich sound that transformed his serious face. And what exactly should a proper miner look like? I didn't mean to offend. No offense taken, he assured her. Truth is, I wasn't always a miner. Life takes unexpected turns sometimes, doesn't it? The simple statement, delivered without self-pity or explanation, struck Catherine with unexpected force. What a diplomatic way to describe the upheaval of one's entire existence. Yes, she agreed softly. Yes, it certainly does. Something passed between them then, a moment of mutual recognition, perhaps. 2 people who had traveled long roads to reach this frontier town, carrying histories they didn't share, but somehow acknowledged in each other. The moment broke when Clara appeared in the doorway, eyebrows raised slightly at the sight of Sullivan. Mr. Hawkins needs to approve any credit arrangements over $50, Mr. Sullivan. He's just returned from his lunch. Of course. Sullivan rose, towering once more in the small office. Thank you for your assistance, Miss Montgomery. I expect we'll be seeing more of each other. It wasn't until after he had departed that Catherine realized he had known her name, though she couldn't recall providing it during their interaction. Word indeed traveled quickly in Prosperity Junction. Within a week, Catherine had transformed the chaotic record-keeping at Hawkins Mercantile into something approaching order. The ledgers now balanced, inventory was properly catalogued, and credit accounts were clearly documented. Mr. Hawkins, initially skeptical of her fancy Eastern methods, had grown increasingly impressed with her efficiency. Never seen anything like it, he declared on Friday afternoon, as Catherine presented him with a comprehensive report of the store's financial position. You've made sense of 10 years' worth of muddle in 5 days. Catherine smiled, pleased by the praise. Thank you, sir. Once the system is established, maintaining it will be much simpler. I've created instructions for Clara to follow on days when I'm not here. About that, Hawkins said, stroking his whiskers thoughtfully. I've been thinking you might consider a full-time position. 6 days a week, with Sundays off naturally, 75 cents per day. The offer surprised Catherine. It was a substantial increase from her current arrangement, enough to secure modest but stable living conditions even after her 2 weeks of paid lodging expired. That's very generous, Mr. Hawkins. Not generosity, Miss Montgomery. Good business sense. You've already saved me more than your wages in discovered accounting errors and overlooked debts. He chuckled. Turns out Jasper Williams has owed me $17 since last winter, claimed he'd paid it, but couldn't argue with your precise records." Catherine's satisfaction was interrupted by the store's door opening, admitting Bartholomew Kensington himself. She had successfully avoided encountering him during her first week in town, though she'd spotted him twice from a distance. Up close, Kensington cut an imposing figure, tall and well-built, with carefully groomed side whiskers and clothes that had clearly been tailored in Denver or perhaps even Chicago. Handsome in a conventional way, with regular features and confident bearing, yet something in his eyes suggested coldness rather than character. His gaze swept the store, faltering momentarily when he spotted Catherine. A flicker of discomfort crossed his face before being replaced by a practiced smile. "Ah, Hawkins," he said, pointedly addressing only the store owner. "I need to discuss the bank's line of credit for your spring inventory." "Certainly, Mr. Kensington. Miss Montgomery here has just reorganized all our accounts. She can provide you with the precise figures." Kensington's smile tightened. "I'd prefer to discuss financial matters privately, if you don't mind." Hawkins frowned slightly. "Miss Montgomery is my bookkeeper. She's established a new system for all our accounts, including the bank credit." "I see." Kensington's gaze finally shifted to Catherine, his expression unreadable. "How fortunate that you found employment so quickly, Miss Montgomery." Catherine lifted her chin slightly. "Indeed. Mr. Hawkins values competence and diligence." Implied criticism hung in the air between them. Hawkins glanced from one to the other, sensing the tension, but apparently deciding not to address it. "I'll fetch the relevant ledgers," Catherine said, retreating to her small office with dignity intact, but heart pounding uncomfortably in her chest. When she returned, Kensington was seated at Hawkins's desk, examining some papers. He barely acknowledged her as she placed the ledger before them. "The current balance on the store's line of credit is $342, she explained, opening to the relevant page. "All payments have been made on schedule, and the account is in good standing." "So I see." Kensington's tone was cool, professional. "The bank is prepared to extend the line to $500 for the spring inventory, contingent on continued prompt payments." The men continued their discussion while Catherine stood by, answering questions about figures when asked but otherwise invisible, exactly as Kensington seemed to prefer. When they concluded their business, he rose to leave without further acknowledgement of her presence. "Miss Montgomery," Hawkins said as the door closed behind Kensington, "I don't mean to pry into your personal affairs, but that was uncommonly awkward." Catherine sighed. "Mr. Kensington and I had a prior arrangement that he terminated upon learning of my financial circumstances. He had expected a bride with means, not a woman who arrived with little more than the clothes on her back." Hawkins raised his eyebrows. "Is that so? Well, Kensington always did have more ambition than sense. His loss is my gain, it seems." He patted her shoulder awkwardly. "Don't let it trouble you. Prosperity Junction values people for what they can do, not what they own." "Thank you, Mr. Hawkins," Catherine managed a smile. "About your offer of full-time employment, I accept gratefully." As Catherine walked back to the boarding house that evening, spring sunshine warming her face, she felt a cautious sense of accomplishment. 1 week in this frontier town, and she had secured respectable employment, made acquaintances who might become friends, and established the beginnings of independence. Yet the encounter with Kensington had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Not because she harbored any lingering attachment to the man. Their correspondence had been practical rather than romantic, and his subsequent rejection had revealed his true character, but because it had starkly highlighted her precarious position. 1 week of good fortune didn't erase the fundamental vulnerability of being a woman alone in an unfamiliar place, with no family connections or social standing to protect her. Kensington's dismissal could have just as easily come from Hawkins or any other potential employer. Her security hung by the thread of others' goodwill. Lost in these troubling thoughts, Catherine didn't notice the approaching rider until he was nearly upon her. "Miss Montgomery," called a familiar voice, "allow me to escort you." Liam Sullivan sat astride a magnificent buckskin gelding, the evening sun glinting off the horse's golden coat. He had exchanged his working clothes for a clean shirt and vest, though he retained the practical trousers and boots of a man accustomed to rough terrain. "Mr. Sullivan," Catherine acknowledged, surprised by his appearance. "That's not necessary. It's only a short walk to Mrs. Whittaker's." "Necessary? Perhaps not. Pleasant? I believe so." His smile was disarming. "Besides, Thunder Creek is on the same route. I've been meeting with the assayer about our latest samples." Catherine hesitated. In Boston, walking unchaperoned with a man would invite scandal, but Prosperity Junction operated by different social codes, and she had already observed that practical considerations often outweighed formal proprieties on the frontier. "Very well," she conceded, "though I wouldn't want to delay you." Sullivan dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse beside her as they continued toward the boarding house. "No delay. I've been hoping for a chance to speak with you again." "Oh?" Catherine kept her tone neutral, though she couldn't deny a flutter of interest. "About business matters?" "Not entirely," he admitted, "though I did want to thank you for expediting the credit arrangement for our equipment. Mr. Hawkins approved it yesterday, said he trusted your assessment of the cooperative's reliability." "I simply reviewed the documents you provided. The cooperative's previous payment history was exemplary." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Sullivan spoke again. "I understand you encountered Bartholomew Kensington today." Catherine glanced at him sharply. "News does travel quickly here." "Small towns," Sullivan said with a shrug. "Everyone knows everyone's business, or thinks they do." "And what business of mine do people think they know, Mr. Sullivan?" His green eyes met hers directly. "That you came to marry Kensington, who rejected you upon learning you weren't wealthy, and that you've since proven yourself more capable than half the businessmen in town." Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That's a remarkably accurate summary. People admire resilience," Sullivan said simply, "especially here, where everyone has faced setbacks of one kind or another." They had reached the boarding house gate. Catherine paused, studying Sullivan with renewed curiosity. "And what setbacks have you faced, Mr. Sullivan? You mentioned you weren't always a miner." A shadow crossed his features. "A story for another time, perhaps." He hesitated, then added, "There's a social gathering at the church Saturday evening. A spring celebration with music, food, dancing. Would you consider attending as my guest?" The invitation caught Catherine off guard. That's very kind, but I'm not sure if it's not a formal courtship proposal," Sullivan clarified, his eyes crinkling with humor. "Just an opportunity to meet more townspeople in a pleasant setting. Mrs. Whittaker will be there, and most of Prosperity Junction." Catherine found herself smiling despite her reservations. "In that case, I'd be pleased to attend." "Thank you." "Excellent. I'll call for you at 6. Sullivan tipped his hat, then hesitated. "One more thing, Miss Montgomery. You might want to know that Leland Blackwell will be arriving on tomorrow's stage." "Who is Leland Blackwell?" "Kensington's future father-in-law, if the rumors are correct, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the territory and 3 banks in Denver. Kensington's been courting his daughter Adelaide since shortly after your correspondence began. The revelation shouldn't have stung. After all, she felt nothing for Kensington beyond contempt for his callous treatment. Yet the knowledge that he had been pursuing another woman, even while writing to her, left a bitter taste. "I see," she said quietly. "Thank you for telling me." Sullivan's expression was sympathetic without being pitying. Kensington isn't worth your disappointment, Miss Montgomery. Men like him measure everything, including people, by their monetary value. A fatal blindness, in my estimation. Before Catherine could respond, the boarding-house door opened, revealing Mrs. Whittaker. "There you are, dear," the landlady called. "Supper's nearly ready. Oh, good evening, Mr. Sullivan." "Mrs. Whittaker," Sullivan acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Just ensuring Miss Montgomery arrived safely. I'll bid you both good evening." As he mounted his horse with practiced ease, Catherine found herself wondering about this enigmatic man who seemed to navigate so comfortably between the rough world of mining and the social niceties of town life. Who spoke of Kensington with thinly veiled disdain, yet showed no ambition for the banker's position or wealth. "He's quite taken with you," Mrs. Whittaker observed after Sullivan had ridden away. "Nonsense," Catherine protested. "He's simply being neighbourly." Mrs. Whittaker's knowing smile suggested otherwise. "Liam Sullivan has lived in Prosperity Junction for 3 years and never once escorted a lady to a social gathering, until now." At supper that evening, Catherine found herself the centre of curious attention once again as her fellow boarders discussed the upcoming social event. "The spring celebration is quite the occasion," Eleanor Palmer explained, passing a plate of biscuits. "Everyone attends, from miners to merchants. The ladies' auxiliary provides refreshments, and there's always dancing." "And you'll be attending with Liam Sullivan," Clara added, her eyes twinkling. "Quite a catch, our Mr. Sullivan." "It's not a courtship," Catherine insisted, "merely a neighbourly invitation." Miss Winslow adjusted her spectacles with a sceptical expression. "Sullivan may have his rough edges, but he's a man of substance. Not like some in this town who value appearance over character." The conversation shifted to preparations, what Catherine might wear, how she should style her hair, until Mrs. Whittaker intervened with practical authority. "Leave the poor girl be," she scolded. "She's had a long week establishing herself without you all matchmaking before she's even unpacked properly." Later, alone in her room, Catherine sat by the window watching as darkness settled over Prosperity Junction. The town transformed in the twilight, windows glowing with lamplight, the distant sounds of a piano from the hotel saloon drifting on. The evening breeze. 1 week ago, she had arrived heartbroken and uncertain. Tonight, she had employment, acquaintances who might become friends, and an invitation to a social gathering with a man who intrigued her, despite her best intentions. Prosperity Junction was not the future she had planned, but as she watched the first stars appear above the mountains, Catherine wondered if perhaps it might offer something better, a life built on her own terms, not dependent on a man's assessment of her worth. Saturday morning brought unusual activity to Prosperity Junction. From her window, Catherine watched as townspeople strung colourful bunting between buildings and erected tables beneath the large cottonwood trees that flanked the churchyard. Children darted about with barely contained excitement, while women carried covered dishes toward the church hall. The spring celebration was clearly a significant event in the town's social calendar. Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect of attending as a newcomer and as Liam Sullivan's guest, a fact that seemed to have generated considerable interest among her fellow boarders. "Miss Montgomery," Mrs. Whittaker called from the hallway, "there's a package for you." Catherine opened her door to find the landlady holding a large paper-wrapped parcel tied with string. "This just arrived from Hawkins Mercantile," Mrs. Whittaker explained, handing over the package. "Clara Jenkins brought it herself." Puzzled, Catherine carried the package to her bed and carefully untied the string. Inside, she found a length of beautiful blue fabric, not silk, but a fine cotton with a subtle pattern woven through it, exactly the shade of a summer sky. Nestled within the folds was a small envelope containing a brief note for tonight's celebration. "Every new beginning deserves a proper commemoration. L.S. Well, Mrs. Whittaker prompted from the doorway where she had remained, making no pretense of not being curious. Catherine wordlessly handed her the note, still stunned by the unexpected gift. The landlady said after reading it. Not overstepping, with jewelry or anything too personal, just a practical gift with a touch of thoughtfulness. The man has sense. She fingered the fabric appreciatively. Good quality too, not ostentatious, but suitable for a social gathering. I can't accept. This, Catherine protested weakly. It's too much. Mrs. Whittaker fixed her with a practical gaze. Nonsense. The gesture is appropriate for a gentleman escorting a lady to her first community event. Besides, she added with uncharacteristic gentleness, sometimes pride is a luxury one can't afford when starting anew. Accept the kindness in the spirit. It's offered. Still uncertain, Catherine examined the fabric again. It was undeniably lovely, and she had nothing suitable for an evening celebration. Her few dresses were practical garments for daily wear, not social occasions. I wouldn't even have time to make something, she said. Mrs. Whittaker smiled. That's easily remedied. Eleanor Palmer can work miracles with a needle, and Clara mentioned that Mr. Sullivan requested the package be delivered early precisely so there would be time for alterations. By early afternoon, Mrs. Palmer had indeed worked a minor miracle. Using one of Catherine's existing dresses as a pattern, and with Catherine's help with the simpler elements, she had created a lovely gown with a modestly scooped neckline, fitted, bodice and full skirt that fell in graceful folds. You have a good figure to work with, Mrs. Palmer commented as she made final adjustments. Slim but not bony. This blue brings out your eyes wonderfully. Catherine hardly recognized herself in the small mirror above her washstand. The vibrant blue transformed her usually pale complexion, lending it warmth and color. Her honey blonde hair, simply but elegantly arranged by Clara's skilled hands, complemented the gown perfectly. There, Clara said, stepping back to admire their collective handiwork. Bartholomew Kensington will eat his heart out when he sees what he rejected. I'm not dressing to impress Mr. Kensington, Catherine protested. Clara grinned mischievously. Oh, of course not. But it's a delightful side benefit, wouldn't you say? Precisely at 6 o'clock, a knock at the boarding-house door announced Sullivan's arrival. Catherine descended the stairs with careful dignity, conscious of Mrs. Whittaker, Eleanor, Clara, and even the usually reserved Miss Winslow watching from the parlour doorway. Sullivan stood in the entrance hall, hat in hand, dressed in what was clearly his finest attire, a well-cut dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, a crisp white shirt, and a vest of subtle grey brocade. He looked more like a successful businessman than a miner, though his sun-bronzed skin and the strength evident in his stance revealed his outdoor profession. His expression as he caught sight of Catherine made her cheeks warm with pleasure. There was admiration in his gaze, certainly, but also something deeper, a genuine appreciation that went beyond mere appearance. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice betraying a hint of his Irish heritage in its musical cadence. "You look lovely. The color suits you perfectly." "Thank you for the fabric," she replied, "though you shouldn't have gone to such expense." "It was my pleasure," he assured her, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The church grounds had been transformed into a festive, gathering space. Tables laden with food lined one side of the yard, while a raised platform at the far end accommodated a small group of musicians, a fiddler, a man with a concertina, and another with a guitar. Lanterns hung from tree branches, ready to provide light when evening fell. As they entered the churchyard, Catherine was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Sullivan seemed unbothered by the attention, guiding her through the crowd with easy confidence, pausing frequently to introduce her to townspeople whose names and occupations blurred together in a whirl of unfamiliar faces. "Don't worry about remembering everyone," he advised quietly. "Just enjoy yourself. They're more curious than judgmental." "Is that Leland Blackwell?" Catherine asked, nodding toward a corpulent gentleman in an expensive suit who stood conversing with Bartholomew. Kensington and a young woman in an elaborate pink gown. Indeed, Sullivan confirmed, and his daughter Adelaide. Quite the display of Denver fashion, isn't it? The comment held no malice, merely amused observation. Catherine studied Miss Blackwell with objective interest. The young woman was conventionally pretty, with fashionably arranged dark curls and a complexion enhanced by subtle cosmetics. Her gown, while undeniably elegant, seemed oddly formal for the frontier setting, as if she had expected a metropolitan ball rather than a community celebration. Kensington seems to have secured his heiress, Catherine observed, surprised to find she felt more pity than jealousy for the girl. If Kensington had pursued her while still corresponding with Catherine, what other deceptions might he be capable of? Sullivan's expression darkened slightly. Adelaide Blackwell deserves better, though I doubt she realizes it yet. Her father's wealth has insulated her from certain realities. Before Catherine could inquire further, Reverend Matthews, the town's minister, called for everyone's attention. A lean man with kind eyes and prematurely white hair, he welcomed the gathering with warm eloquence. Spring has always been a time of renewal and hope, he proclaimed. Here in Prosperity Junction, it holds special significance. We've endured another Wyoming winter together. Now we celebrate new beginnings, new growth, and new additions to our community. His gaze found Catherine in the crowd, and he smiled. Speaking of which, I believe we have several newcomers to welcome. Miss Catherine Montgomery recently arrived from Boston, and the Blackwell family visiting from Denver. Prosperity Junction embraces you all. The simple inclusion brought an unexpected lump to Catherine's throat. After the rejection that had marked her arrival, this public welcome felt like a balm to wounded pride. The celebration properly commenced after the Reverend's blessing. Food was shared, music played, and conversation flowed as freely as the coffee and lemonade that filled cups around the gathering. Catherine found herself drawn into discussions with townspeople who seemed genuinely interested in her perspective as a newcomer. "Boston, eh?" remarked Henry Jenkins, Clara's father and owner of the livery stable. "Must find our little settlement. Quite primitive by comparison." "Different, certainly," Catherine replied diplomatically, "but there's a warmth to Prosperity Junction that larger cities often lack. People seem to truly know their neighbors here." "For better or worse," chuckled Mrs. Jenkins. "Can't sneeze without someone offering a handkerchief or suggesting a remedy." As twilight deepened, the lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the gathering. The musicians struck up a livelier tune, and couples began to form for dancing. In the cleared area before the platform, "Would you care to dance, Miss Montgomery?" Sullivan asked, extending his hand. Catherine hesitated. "I should warn you, I'm familiar with formal ballroom dances, not—" She gestured to the energetic movements of the couples already on the improvised dance floor. Sullivan smiled. "Country dances are more about enjoyment than precision. I'll guide you through it." True to his word, Sullivan proved an excellent partner, steering Catherine through the unfamiliar patterns with gentle guidance. His hand at her waist was respectful yet steadying, his movements confident without being overbearing. After initial awkwardness, Catherine found herself enjoying the lively rhythm, laughing as they circled with the other dancers. During a pause between songs, Sullivan fetched them cups of lemonade. They stood at the edge of the dancing area, pleasantly warm from exertion, watching as other couples continued to twirl and step to the music. "You mentioned that you weren't always a minor," Catherine said, seizing the moment of relative privacy. "What brought you to Prosperity Junction?" Sullivan's expression grew thoughtful. "A desire for honest work, I suppose, and perhaps a measure of redemption." "Redemption from what?" He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. I was once a civil engineer in Chicago, designed bridges, railways, municipal buildings, had a promising career, a fiancé from a good family, all the trappings of success. What happened? Catherine asked gently, sensing they were approaching the heart of his story. The Chicago fire happened, October 1871. His voice grew distant. My firm had designed several of the buildings that burned most catastrophically. There were investigations afterward, accusations of substandard materials, corners cut for profit. Catherine listened, beginning to understand the shadows that occasionally darkened his gaze. Were you responsible? Not directly. I had warned about certain structural vulnerabilities, filed reports recommending changes. His jaw tightened. But I didn't fight hard enough when those recommendations were ignored. I chose career advancement over professional integrity. So, you left Chicago? Sullivan nodded. After the investigations cleared the firm officially, money speaks loudly in such matters. I couldn't continue, not with the knowledge that people had died in buildings I helped design. My fiancé's family encouraged me to stay, to accept the official findings and move forward. When I couldn't, the engagement ended. And you came west. Eventually, I wandered for a time, worked odd jobs, ended up in Denver, where I met Jack Thornton, an old prospector who needed someone with engineering knowledge to help assess a claim. One thing led to another, and here I am, part owner of a modestly successful mining operation. Catherine considered his revelation, understanding now the complexity behind his seemingly simple existence. Do you miss it? Engineering. A smile touched his lips. Sometimes. Which is why our new hydraulic system is more carefully designed than strictly necessary for a small mining operation. He studied her face for a moment. Does my past disappoint you? The question surprised her. Why would it? You made a difficult choice based on principle rather than expediency. That speaks to character, not failure. Relief flickered across his features. Not everyone sees it that way. Many would consider abandoning a successful profession for physical labor in the wilderness to be a step down in the world. Perhaps, Catherine acknowledged, but I'm beginning to think the world's measurements aren't always accurate. Their conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Bartholomew Kensington, Adelaide Blackwell on his arm. The banker's expression was polite but cool as he approached. Miss Montgomery Sullivan, enjoying the celebration, I see. Indeed, Sullivan replied easily. Prosperity Junction knows how to welcome spring properly. Adelaide Blackwell studied Catherine with undisguised curiosity. Father says you're from Boston, Miss Montgomery. How thrilling. I've always wanted to visit the East. Is it as culturally vibrant as they say? There was no malice in her question, only genuine interest. Catherine responded with equal cordiality. Boston has its charms, certainly. Excellent theaters, libraries, museums, though I find Prosperity Junction has its own unique culture. How diplomatic, Kensington remarked, a slight edge to his voice. Though hardly comparable, I would think. Sullivan's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Different doesn't imply inferior, Kensington, something Easterners often forget when they venture west. Before the conversation could grow more strained, the musicians began a new song, a waltz more familiar to Catherine than the earlier country dances. Ah, something civilized, Kensington said, clearly pleased. Shall we, Miss Blackwell? As they moved away, Catherine couldn't help noticing how Kensington guided Adelaide with a proprietary air, as if displaying a particularly valuable acquisition. Would you care to continue dancing? Sullivan asked, his eyes holding hers. I'd like that very much, Catherine replied, suddenly grateful for this man who valued honesty over appearances, who had shared his vulnerabilities without pretense. As they joined the other couples, Sullivan drew her slightly closer than was strictly proper, his hand warm against the small of her back. Catherine found she didn't mind. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me, not my circumstances or my prospects, just me." His smile in response held a warmth that remained with her long after the music ended and the evening drew to a close. The Monday following, the spring celebration brought unexpected news to Prosperity Junction. Catherine had just finished reconciling the previous week's sales figures at Hawkins Mercantile when Clara burst into the small office, eyes wide with excitement. "Have you heard? There's been a significant gold strike at Thunder Creek." Catherine looked up from her ledger. "At Mr. Sullivan's claim?" "The very same," Clara confirmed, perching on the edge of the desk. "Word came in this morning. They've uncovered a vein that's supposedly richer than anything seen in these parts for years. The assayer nearly fainted when he tested the samples." A mixture of emotions washed over Catherine. Pleasure for Sullivan's good fortune, certainly, but also a peculiar apprehension. Success of this magnitude would inevitably change things. "Has Mr. Sullivan confirmed this himself?" "He's still at the claim," Clara explained. "But his partner, Jack Thornton, came to town with the news and the samples. The whole town's buzzing with it." She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "You know what this means, don't you? Your Mr. Sullivan is about to become one of the wealthiest men in the territory." "He's hardly my Mr. Sullivan," Catherine protested automatically, though the events of the spring celebration, their dances, their conversations, the way his hand had lingered on hers when they parted, suggested an attachment neither had explicitly acknowledged. "Well, he escorted you to the social, gave you fabric for a new dress, and looked at you like you hung the moon." Clara counted off on her fingers. "In Prosperity Junction, that's practically an engagement announcement." Before Catherine could formulate a suitably dignified response, Mr. Hawkins appeared in the doorway, his expression unusually serious. "Miss Montgomery, might I have a word?" Clara took the hint and departed, with a quick smile of encouragement. Hawkins closed the door behind her and settled his substantial frame into the visitor's chair. "I've just had a rather interesting conversation with Bartholomew Kensington," he began without preamble. "It seems the bank is interested in offering you a position." Catherine blinked in surprise. "I beg your pardon." "Kensington claims they need someone with your bookkeeping expertise to help organize their accounts department, offering $1.25 per day, 6 days a week." Hawkins stroked his whiskers thoughtfully. "Considerably more than I'm currently paying you." The unexpected offer left Catherine momentarily speechless. Why would Kensington, who had so thoroughly rejected her as a bride, now seek to employ her? And at such a generous salary? "I don't understand," she said finally. "Mr. Kensington made his opinion of me quite clear upon my arrival." Hawkins nodded. "That's what I found curious as well, until I heard about Sullivan's gold strike this morning." He fixed Catherine with a shrewd gaze. "Timing is an interesting thing, isn't it?" Understanding dawned. "You think Kensington's offer is related to Mr. Sullivan's discovery?" "I think Bartholomew Kensington rarely does anything without calculating the potential advantages." Hawkins leaned back in his chair. "Your connection to Sullivan was quite visible at the spring celebration. Perhaps Kensington sees value in that connection now that Sullivan's prospects have improved so dramatically." A chill ran through Catherine despite the warmth of the spring day. The idea that Kensington might view her as a means of access to Sullivan's newfound wealth was both insulting and disturbing. "I'm perfectly content with my position here, Mr. Hawkins," she said firmly. Relief flashed across the merchant's face. "Glad to hear it, though I'd understand if you were tempted by the higher wage." "Some things are worth more than money," Catherine replied, "like working with people one respects." The door to the mercantile opened, accompanied by the familiar jingle of the bell. Through the office doorway, Catherine caught a glimpse of Adelaide Blackwell entering the store, accompanied by an older woman who must be her mother, a handsome, imposing figure in an expensive traveling ensemble. "I should attend to the customers," Hawkins said, rising from his chair. "Think about the bank's offer if you like, Miss Montgomery. No need to give me an answer immediately." As Hawkins departed, Catherine found herself wondering about Adelaide. Blackwell. The young woman had seemed pleasant enough at the celebration, genuinely curious about Boston and apparently unaware of Catherine's prior connection to her suitor. Did she know of Kensington's attempt to recruit Catherine for the bank? Was she aware of his previous arrangements for a mail-order bride? Putting these questions aside, Catherine returned to her ledgers. The afternoon passed quickly as a steady stream of customers kept the mercantile busy, many apparently in town to discuss the Thunder Creek gold strike and stock up on supplies while they considered trying their own luck in the area. It was nearly closing time when the bell jangled again, and Liam Sullivan himself strode into the store. His clothes bore the dust of the trail, and weariness lined his face, but his eyes lit up when he spotted Catherine through the office doorway. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her, removing his hat as he approached. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Your work?" "Not at all," she replied, setting aside her pen. "I understand congratulations are in order. Mr. Thornton brought news of your discovery." Sullivan's smile was genuine but tempered with caution. "The vein is promising, certainly, though Jack may have exaggerated its significance in his excitement. We won't know the full extent until we've done more excavation." His modesty was refreshing after a day of hearing increasingly extravagant rumors about Thunder Creek's riches. "Still, it must be gratifying after all your work." "It is," he acknowledged, "though sudden success brings its own complications." Before he could elaborate, Mrs. Whitaker appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless as if she had hurried from the boarding house. "Oh, good. You're still here," she said to Catherine. "And Mr. Sullivan, too. How fortunate." She glanced between them with uncharacteristic awkwardness. "I'm afraid there's been a development at the boarding house that you should know about." "Dear," Catherine felt a prickle of concern. "What's happened?" "The Blackwells have taken rooms with us, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell and their daughter. They've decided to extend their stay in Prosperity Junction indefinitely." Mrs. Whitaker hesitated. "And Mr. Kensington called this afternoon while you were working. He's invited you to dine with them this evening at the hotel restaurant. He was most insistent that I deliver the message." Sullivan's expression darkened. Though he remained silent, Catherine felt trapped between confusion and indignation. After rejecting her so thoroughly, after pursuing Adelaide Blackwell while still corresponding with her, Kensington now presumed to invite her to dine as if they were social acquaintances. "Please inform Mr. Kensington that I have a prior engagement." "This evening," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. Mrs. Whitaker looked relieved. "I thought that might be your response, though he seemed quite determined." "I'm sure he did," Catherine murmured. Sullivan cleared his throat. "Perhaps I could offer an alternative, Miss Montgomery. Jack and I were planning to celebrate our discovery with a simple dinner at the Thunder Creek camp. Nothing formal, just good food, and perhaps better company than you'd find at the hotel. You'd be most welcome to join us, along with Mrs. Whitaker as chaperone, of course." The invitation, offered with such straightforward sincerity, washed away Catherine's distress at Kensington's presumption. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you." "Excellent," Mrs. Whitaker declared, clearly approving of this arrangement. "I'll just need to arrange for someone to watch over the boarding house in my absence." "Miss Winslow would likely be willing," Catherine suggested. "She mentioned having papers to grade this evening." As arrangements were finalized for the dinner excursion, Catherine could not help but reflect on the stark contrast between Kensington's calculated maneuvering and Sullivan's transparent invitation. One man sought to use her for potential advantage. The other simply wanted to share a moment of celebration with someone whose company he valued. The ride to Thunder Creek, some 5 miles from town, gave Catherine her first glimpse of the countryside beyond Prosperity Junction's immediate surroundings. Sullivan drove a sturdy wagon with Catherine and Mrs. Whitaker seated comfortably on the bench beside him, pointing out landmarks as they traveled. Blackwell's ranch lands in the distance, the mountain pass that led to Denver, and finally the approach to Thunder Creek itself. The mining camp was more organized than Catherine had expected. A half-dozen sturdy cabins formed a rough semicircle around a central clearing, with various mining equipment arranged in neat order nearby. Men moved purposefully about their tasks despite the evening hour, though many paused to wave or call. Greetings as Sullivan's wagon approached. "Home, sweet home," Sullivan said with a touch of pride as he helped Catherine and Mrs. Whitaker down from the wagon. "It's not fancy, but it's solid and honest." Jack Thornton met them at the largest cabin, a grizzled man of indeterminate age with a weathered face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Sullivan, you old dog," he greeted his partner affectionately. "Brought the prettiest gals in the territory. To our humble abode, did you? Mind your manners, Jack," Sullivan warned good-naturedly. "Mrs. Whitaker and Miss Montgomery are our guests." Thornton grinned, executing an exaggerated bow. "Honored, ladies, truly honored. Now come in before the stew gets cold. Young Jamie's been watching it like his life depends on it." The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable. A large main room with a stone fireplace, solid wooden furniture crafted with obvious care, and surprisingly civilized touches like proper glass windows and shelves lined with books. A young man of perhaps 18 tended a large pot hanging over the fire, while an older gentleman with spectacles set places at the long table. "Jamie Riley, our apprentice miner," Sullivan introduced, "and Dr. Marcus Fleming, our resident scholar, and occasional medic." "Don't let the doctor fool you, ma'am," Fleming said to Catherine with a self-deprecating smile. "I studied geology, not medicine, though I've set my share of broken bones in a pinch. The meal that followed was simple, but delicious. Venison stew, fresh bread, and preserved peaches for dessert." The conversation flowed easily, moving from mining techniques, carefully explained for the ladies' benefit, to town gossip, to aspirations for Thunder Creek's future now that the new vein had been discovered. "We'll need to expand operations," Thornton explained, outlining plans with animated gestures. "Hire more men, bring in additional equipment. That hydraulic system you designed will be crucial now, Sullivan." "What about the Eastern investors you mentioned?" Dr. Fleming inquired. "With this discovery, surely they'll be eager to increase their stake." A shadow crossed Sullivan's face. "Perhaps too eager. Johnson's telegram today mentioned consolidation opportunities and management restructuring, meaning they want to take over now that we've struck it rich," Thornton translated bluntly. "Push us out or reduce us to hired managers of our own claim." Catherine, who had been listening attentively, frowned. "Can they do that? Legally, I mean?" "Not without our agreement," Sullivan assured her. "We own the claim outright. But they control the capital we need for expansion, and they have connections to the smelters and railways necessary to process and transport the ore." "It's the old story," Dr. Fleming added with a sigh. "The men who do the actual work of discovery rarely retain control of its fruits. Capital speaks louder than labor in the end." As the discussion continued, Catherine found herself drawing parallels to Kensington's sudden interest in her employment, his invitation to dine with the Blackwells. The world operated on calculations of advantage, it seemed, whether in mining investments or social connections. After the meal, while Mrs. Whitaker engaged Dr. Fleming in conversation about his extensive book collection, Sullivan invited Catherine to step outside for a breath of fresh air. The evening was clear and cool, with stars emerging in a velvet sky above the jagged silhouette of mountains to the west. "I wanted to thank you," Sullivan said quietly, as they stood watching the last light fade from the peaks, "for coming tonight, for choosing our simple celebration over Kensington's invitation." "There was no choice to make," Catherine replied. "Honestly, I have no desire for Mr. Kensington's company. Sullivan turned to face her, his expression serious in the gathering dusk. Catherine, Miss Montgomery, I should tell you that my circumstances may become complicated in the coming weeks. This discovery has drawn attention we didn't anticipate from people whose motives aren't always straightforward. People like Mr. Kensington, among others. There are rumors that Blackwell himself is interested in acquiring mining properties to diversify his holdings. He hesitated. I wouldn't want you to be caught in any unpleasantness that might arise. From business rivalries. Catherine studied him thoughtfully. Are you suggesting we should distance ourselves from each other? No, he answered quickly. Then more deliberately, no, that's not what I want at all. I'm merely warning you that associations have consequences in places like Prosperity Junction. Your reputation matters, especially as a woman making her own way. My reputation survived being jilted before I even arrived, Catherine pointed out. With a touch of wry humor, I suspect it can withstand being seen in the company of a successful miner. The tension in Sullivan's shoulders eased slightly. You're a remarkable woman, Catherine Montgomery. I'm a practical one, she corrected. And I value honesty above all else. Something I've found in short supply until recently. He reached for her hand then, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I promise you this, whatever happens with Thunder Creek, with investors or rivals or the gold itself, you'll have nothing but honesty from me. The simple vow, spoken under a canopy of stars with the distant sounds of the mining camp as backdrop, felt more binding than any formal declaration could have been. Catherine turned her hand in his, linking their fingers together in silent acknowledgement. It's getting late, she said eventually. Mrs. Whitaker will be wondering where we've gotten to. Sullivan nodded, reluctantly releasing her hand. We should get you both back to town. As they walked back toward the cabin, neither noticed the rider observing them from the shadows of the pines at the camp's edge. A figure who watched their interaction with calculating interest before turning his horse back toward Prosperity Junction. 3 days after the dinner at Thunder Creek, Catherine found herself facing an unexpected visitor at Hawkins Mercantile. She had just completed the monthly inventory report when Adelaide Blackwell appeared in the doorway of her small office, looking rather uncomfortable in her fashionable dress amid the practical surroundings of the store. Miss Montgomery, I hope. I'm not intruding, Adelaide said, her voice carrying the polished tones of an expensive Eastern education despite her Western upbringing. Not at all, Catherine replied, setting aside her work. How can I help you, Miss Blackwell? Adelaide glanced over her shoulder to ensure they weren't overheard, then stepped fully into the office, closing the door behind her. I was hoping we might speak privately, woman to woman. Intrigued, Catherine gestured to the chair opposite her desk. Adelaide settled herself primly, arranging her skirts with practiced grace before meeting Catherine's gaze directly. I understand you and Mr. Kensington had an arrangement prior to my father's business dealings with him, she began, her directness surprising Catherine. That's correct, Catherine acknowledged, seeing no reason to deny what had apparently become common knowledge. Mr. Kensington advertised for a bride, we corresponded, and he withdrew his offer upon learning of my financial circumstances. Adelaide winced slightly. Yes, well, that's partly why I wanted to speak with you. She twisted her hands in her lap, revealing an uncharacteristic nervousness. You see, Mr. Kensington has asked for my hand in marriage. Congratulations, Catherine offered automatically, though something in Adelaide's demeanor suggested felicitations might be premature. Thank you, but I'm not certain congratulations are in order just yet. Adelaide drew a deep breath. My father favors the match for business reasons. The bank's connections would complement our ranching interests nicely, but I have reservations. Catherine remained silent, sensing There was more to come. "I was hoping you might tell me what kind of man Mr. Kensington revealed himself to be in your correspondence, before he knew about your circumstances, that is." Adelaide's eyes, a warm brown that contrasted with her cool exterior, held genuine concern. What did he value? What did he discuss? Was he kind? The request caught Catherine off guard. Her instinct was to protect herself by offering platitudes, but the genuine worry in Adelaide's expression stopped her. This wasn't mere curiosity or an attempt to gloat. This was a woman facing a life-altering decision with limited information. "Our correspondence was primarily practical," Catherine began carefully. "Mr. Kensington wrote of his position at the bank, his standing in the community, his ambitions for expansion. He inquired about my education, my household skills, my health." She paused, considering her next words. "He rarely mentioned personal feelings or interests beyond business prospects." Adelaide nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had suspected. "And when he withdrew his offer, was it kind?" Catherine thought of the cold, efficient letter that had awaited her arrival. It was direct. "He provided for 2 weeks. Lodging to allow me time to make alternative arrangements. There was no cruelty, but no particular compassion either. It was a business decision handled accordingly." "I see." Adelaide was silent for a moment, her gaze distant. "At the spring celebration, I noticed you seemed quite comfortable with Mr. Sullivan. You danced together several times." The apparent change of subject puzzled Catherine. "Yes, Mr. Sullivan has been very kind since my arrival in Prosperity Junction." "Before or after his gold strike?" Adelaide asked, then immediately flushed. "Forgive me, that was terribly forward. It's just, my father says that men's characters are revealed not by how they treat people when it benefits them, but by how they treat those from whom they expect nothing." Understanding dawned. Adelaide wasn't merely asking about Kensington. She was comparing him to Sullivan, trying to gauge the true nature of both men. "Mr. Sullivan showed me kindness from our first meeting," Catherine answered honestly. "When I was simply a newcomer with uncertain prospects, he treated me with respect and consideration. The gold strike hasn't changed his behavior toward me, or others in town as far as I can observe." Relief flickered across Adelaide's features. "That aligns with what I've heard from others. Thank you for your candor, Miss Montgomery. I know this must be an awkward conversation." "May I ask you something in return?" Catherine ventured. Adelaide nodded. "Did Mr. Kensington pursue your acquaintance before or after he terminated our arrangement?" A shadow crossed Adelaide's face. "During, I believe. Father introduced us when Mr. Kensington visited Denver last winter to discuss expanding the bank's operations. He began calling on me in February, though his letters to you apparently continued until March." The confirmation of Kensington's duplicity stung, even though Catherine had suspected as much. "I see. Thank you for your honesty." Adelaide rose, smoothing her skirts with a gesture that seemed more nervous habit than necessity. "I should go. Father's expecting me at the hotel for luncheon." She hesitated, then added in a rush, "I've heard there's to be a meeting tomorrow at the bank about the Thunder Creek Mining Cooperative. Father and Mr. Kensington have been in discussions about investment opportunities." The warning was oblique, but clear. Catherine nodded her understanding. "Thank you, Miss Blackwell." After Adelaide departed, Catherine sat motionless at her desk, processing the conversation. Adelaide's visit revealed more than just Kensington's character. It highlighted the web of business and personal interests that had begun to form around Sullivan's discovery. A web that could either support the mining cooperative's growth or ensnare it in outside control. Sullivan should be warned about the meeting, she decided. Gathering her shawl, Catherine made her excuses to Mr. Hawkins and set out for the assayer's office, where Sullivan had mentioned he would be conducting business that afternoon. The spring day had turned unseasonably warm, the streets of Prosperity, Junction dusty under the bright sunshine. Catherine moved quickly, nodding to acquaintances, but not stopping for conversation. As she approached the assayer's building, she noticed Kensington himself emerging, accompanied by Leland Blackwell, a coincidence that confirmed Adelaide's information. Ducking into the alley beside the building, Catherine waited until the men had passed before entering the assayer's office. The interior was crowded with equipment, scales, testing apparatus, and locked cabinets that presumably held valuable ore samples. Sullivan stood deep in conversation with the assayer, a thin man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose. Both men looked up at her entrance, surprise evident on their faces. "Miss Montgomery," Sullivan greeted her. "This is unexpected. I apologize for the interruption, but I needed to speak with you." Catherine glanced at the assayer, who discreetly moved to the far end of the room, giving them a semblance of privacy. Quickly and efficiently, Catherine relayed the substance of Adelaide's warning about the upcoming bank meeting. Sullivan listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grave. "So, Blackwell is involved now," he said when she had finished. "That complicates matters significantly. His financial resources far exceed our current investors' capabilities." Miss Blackwell seemed concerned, Catherine added. "She didn't provide details, but I gathered she feels her father and Mr. Kensington may not have the cooperative's best interests in mind." Sullivan rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "I'm grateful for the warning. Jack and I will need to prepare carefully for tomorrow's meeting." His gaze softened as he studied her face. "Thank you for bringing this to me so promptly. It couldn't have been easy, given your history with Kensington." "My history with Mr. Kensington is precisely why I didn't hesitate," Catherine replied. "I've seen how he operates when financial interests are at stake." A hint of a smile touched Sullivan's lips. "Remind me never to find myself on the opposing side of your loyalties, Miss Montgomery." The following day brought thunderstorms rolling across the mountains, shrouding Prosperity Junction in alternating patterns of darkness and brilliant sunlight. From her window at the boarding house, Catherine watched the weather's dramatic display as she prepared for work, her thoughts preoccupied with Sullivan's meeting at the bank. At breakfast, the atmosphere was unusually tense. The Blackwells ate quickly and departed for the hotel, where Leland Blackwell had established a temporary office. Mrs. Whittaker, never one to disguise her opinions, watched them go with a disapproving frown. "That man's been turning this town upside down since he arrived," she muttered to Catherine as they cleared the breakfast dishes. "Poking into everyone's business, making grand pronouncements about development and progress." "Do you know Mr. Blackwell well?" Catherine asked. "Known him since he was a scrappy rancher with just 50 head of cattle and more ambition than sense," Mrs. Whittaker replied. "Made his fortune through hard work initially, I'll give him that. But the bigger his holdings grew, the more ruthless his methods became." She shook her head. The man Adelaide Blackwell described to her finishing school friends in Denver bears little resemblance to the man I remember. This glimpse into Blackwell's past added another layer to Catherine's concerns about the bank meeting. If the cattle baron had indeed built his empire through increasingly ruthless tactics, what might he have planned for Thunder Creek's gold? At the Mercantile, business was slow due to the intermittent downpours. Catherine used the quiet time to catch up on correspondence and prepare supply orders for the coming month. She had just completed a particularly complex inventory calculation when the bell jangled, announcing a visitor. Jack Thornton stood in the doorway, water streaming from his oilskin coat and hat. His weathered face was set in lines of grim determination. "Miss Montgomery," he said with a curt nod. "Is Sullivan here?" "No," Catherine replied, setting aside her pen. "I haven't seen him today. Isn't he at the bank meeting?" Thornton's expression darkened further. "Meeting ended an hour ago. Sullivan was supposed to meet me at the telegraph office afterward, but he never showed. Thought he might have stopped here to see you." A prickle of unease ran down Catherine's spine. "What happened at the meeting, Mr. Thornton?" "Nothing good." Thornton removed his hat, scattering droplets across the wooden floor. "Blackwell and Kensington presented an acquisition offer for the Thunder Creek claim. Called it a generous buyout opportunity that would eliminate our need for additional investors." His tone made clear what he thought of that characterization. "And Mr. Sullivan declined?" "We both did, naturally. Told them Thunder Creek wasn't for sale at any price." Thornton ran a hand through his damp hair. "That's when things got tense. Blackwell suggested we might find ourselves facing operational difficulties if we didn't reconsider. Access to the smelter, shipping rates, labor, issues. All the ways a man with Blackwell's connections could make our lives difficult without ever breaking a law." Catherine's unease deepened. "And after the meeting, Sullivan said he needed to clear his head, think through our options. Said he'd meet me at the telegraph office at 2 o'clock to send word to our lawyer in Denver." Thornton glanced at the clock on the wall. "It's past 3 now." Before Catherine could respond, the door opened again. Dr. Fleming entered, his scholarly appearance at odds with his mud-splattered clothing and agitated demeanor. "Thornton, thank God I found you." He caught sight of Catherine and hesitated. "Miss Montgomery, I'm sorry, but this is urgent." "What's happened?" Thornton demanded. Fleming drew a deep breath. "There's been an accident at Thunder Creek. The new excavation shaft partially collapsed during the storm. Jamie went to check the supports and got trapped. Sullivan went in after him, and now they're both caught behind a rockfall." The world seemed to tilt beneath Catherine's feet. Sullivan, trapped, in a mine collapse, the very nightmare that haunted every mining community. "How bad?" Thornton asked, his voice tight with controlled fear. "Bad enough," Fleming replied grimly. "We need every able hand available. I've sent word to the other mining operations nearby. But with the storm, help will be slow arriving." Catherine found her voice at last. "Are they alive, Mr. Sullivan and Jamie?" Fleming nodded. "They were when I left. We've established voice contact through an air shaft. But time is critical. The longer they're trapped, the greater the risk of further collapse or flooding from the storm." Without hesitation, Catherine turned to Mr. Hawkins, who had emerged from the storeroom at the commotion. "I need to go with them." The merchant looked startled. "To a mine collapse? That's no place for a lady, Miss Montgomery." "I have experience with organized rescue efforts," Catherine insisted, thinking of the charity work she had done after a factory collapse in Boston. "I can help coordinate supplies, maintain records of workers and shifts, ensure communications remain clear." She met Hawkins' concerned gaze steadily. "Please, Mr. Hawkins, I need to be there." After a moment's consideration, Hawkins nodded reluctantly. "Take whatever supplies you think might be useful. And be careful, I need my bookkeeper back in one." "Peace." Within minutes, Catherine had assembled a crate of essentials: lantern oil, bandages, blankets, coffee, and hard biscuits from the mercantile's stock. As Thornton helped load these into his wagon, a third figure joined their hasty departure: Clara Jenkins, determined and practical in men's trousers and a heavy coat. "Don't try to dissuade me," she warned, as Catherine opened her mouth to protest. "I've lived in mining towns my whole life. I know what's needed at a rescue site, and it's not another hysterical woman wringing her hands." The journey to Thunder Creek, difficult under normal conditions, became treacherous in the storm. The wagon lurched through mud-slicked paths, while lightning periodically illuminated the stark landscape in brilliant flashes. By the time they arrived at the mining camp, Catherine's clothes were soaked through and her teeth chattered with cold and anxiety. The scene at the mine entrance resembled organized chaos. Men moved with urgent purpose, shouting instructions over the storm's rumble. A makeshift shelter had been erected near the mine opening, under which several miners huddled, passing tools and discussing rescue strategies. Dr. Fleming, led Catherine and Clara to this shelter, while Thornton immediately joined the rescue effort. "We've established a secondary access point," Fleming explained, pointing to a diagram sketched in the mud. "Sullivan and Jamie are trapped approximately 50 feet in, behind a substantial rock fall. The good news is there's an air shaft providing ventilation. The bad news is the storm is making everything unstable." As Catherine absorbed this information, a miner emerged from the mine entrance, his face streaked with dirt and desperation. "We've reached the edge of the fall," he reported. "Can hear them both. Sullivan says the boy's hurt but stable. They've got enough space, but water's starting to seep in from somewhere." Fleming's expression tightened. "How long to clear a passage?" The miner shook his head. "Hours, at best, and that's if nothing shifts further." Clara squeezed Catherine's hand briefly before moving into action, organizing the supplies they had brought and establishing a rotation system for the exhausted rescuers. Catherine, fighting to maintain her composure, focused on creating a ledger of all present, tracking who had entered the mine and for how long, ensuring no one became lost in the confusion. As twilight deepened the storm's shadows, lanterns were lit around the camp, creating pools of golden light against the encroaching darkness. The rescue continued without pause, men rotating in and out of the narrow passage. They were painstakingly excavating through the fallen rock. During a brief lull in the rain, Catherine stepped away from the shelter, needing a moment alone to collect herself. The magnitude of what might be lost, Sullivan's life, his future, the connection they had just begun to explore, threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. "He'll make it through," came a voice beside her. Jack Thornton, his face grey with exhaustion, had approached without her noticing. "Sullivan's survived worse than this, and he's got something to live for now." Catherine didn't pretend to misunderstand. "We barely know each other, Mr. Thornton." "Some things don't need time," Thornton replied simply. "Some things you just recognize when they're right." He glanced back toward the mine entrance. "He's a good man, Sullivan, the best I've known. Whatever happens here, remember that." Before Catherine could respond, a shout came from the mine entrance. "We're through! We've reached them!" The next moments passed in a blur of activity. Rescuers disappeared into the passage, emerging minutes later, supporting a dust-covered Jamie, blood caking one side of his face, but remarkably alert. Dr. Fleming immediately took charge of the young man, guiding him to a makeshift examination area. Catherine stood frozen, watching the mine entrance with desperate intensity. When Sullivan finally emerged, supported by Thornton and another miner, a sob of relief escaped her. He was filthy, limping, and clearly exhausted, but alive. Their eyes met across the chaotic scene, and even through the grime covering his face, Catherine could see the same overwhelming relief in his gaze. Without conscious thought, she moved toward him, propriety forgotten in the wake of near tragedy. "You're all right," she whispered, as she reached him, her voice breaking slightly. "Thank God you're all right." Sullivan reached for her hand, his fingers cold and trembling slightly, but his grip firm. "I heard your voice," he said hoarsely. "From above ground, through the air shaft. Knew you were there, gave me strength." The simple admission, spoken without pretense or calculation, moved Catherine more deeply than any elaborate declaration could have. In that moment, surrounded by mud and exhaustion, and the remnants of fear, something fundamental shifted between them. An unspoken acknowledgement that what had begun as casual interest had transformed into something far more profound. "Don't ever do that again," she managed, fighting back tears. "Do you understand? Not ever." The ghost of a smile touched his dirt-streaked face. "Yes, ma'am." As Dr. Fleming approached to examine Sullivan, neither of them noticed the rider observing. From the ridge above the camp, the same figure who had watched them days earlier, now documenting the scene with calculated interest, before turning back toward Prosperity Junction through the gathering darkness. 2 weeks after the mine collapse, Prosperity Junction buzzed with activity and gossip in equal measure. The near tragedy at Thunder Creek had catalyzed unexpected developments throughout the community, reshuffling alliances and revealing true characters with the efficiency of a well-dealt hand of cards. Catherine sat at her desk in Hawkins Mercantile, finalizing the monthly accounts, when Clara burst through the door, her expression alight with excitement. "Have you heard?" she demanded without preamble. "Adelaide Blackwell has broken her engagement to Kensington." Catherine set down her pen. "Are you certain? I saw them together at church just yesterday." "Absolutely certain," Clara confirmed, settling on the edge of the desk. "Mrs. Whittaker heard it directly from Adelaide herself this morning. Apparently, she told Kensington she couldn't proceed with the marriage after learning certain details about his character." Though Catherine maintained a neutral expression, inwardly she wondered if their conversation had influenced Adelaide's decision. "How did Mr. Kensington take the news?" "Not well, according to Mrs. Whittaker. There was quite a scene at the boarding house. Mr. Blackwell is furious as well. Apparently the banking partnership was contingent upon the marriage." The news was still sinking in when the Mercantile's bell jangled, announcing another visitor. Liam Sullivan appeared in the doorway, looking considerably recovered from his ordeal, though a healing cut still marked his forehead. He nodded politely to Clara, who took the hint with a knowing smile and excused herself. "Good morning, Miss Montgomery," Sullivan greeted Catherine, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "Not at all," she replied, noting how his presence still caused her heart to quicken, even after the many hours they had spent together during his recovery. "How is Jamie doing?" "Much improved. Dr. Fleming says he can return to light duties next week." Sullivan moved closer, his expression turning serious. "I've come with news and a question." Catherine waited, sensing the weight of whatever he had. "And come to say, the investors from Denver arrived yesterday," Sullivan began. "After reviewing the damage from the collapse and assessing the new vein, they've made a decision. They're offering to buy out Thornton's share of the cooperative, allowing him to retire comfortably, as he's been wanting to do." "And your share?" Catherine asked, already guessing the answer. "They want me to stay on as chief engineer and operating partner with a significant ownership stake. The capital they're providing will allow us to implement proper safety measures and expand operations substantially." A smile touched his lips. "It seems nearly losing your life in a mine makes investors suddenly concerned about structural integrity." "That's wonderful news," Catherine said sincerely. "I know you've been worried about the future of Thunder Creek since the collapse." "There's more," Sullivan continued. "Blackwell's attempt to force a buyout has backfired spectacularly. After word spread about the pressure he and Kensington tried to exert, our Denver investors accelerated their involvement. They've even arranged for independent access to the smelter in Silver Creek, bypassing Blackwell's influence entirely." Catherine absorbed this information, understanding the dramatic shift in power it represented. "So Thunder Creek is secure." "Now, more than secure," Sullivan confirmed. "With proper investment and development, it could become the most productive operation in the territory within a year." He paused, studying her face carefully. "Which brings me to my question." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft leather. Carefully unfolding it, he revealed a ring unlike any Catherine had seen before, a band of gold that appeared to have been crafted from raw nuggets, smoothed and polished, but retaining their natural form, with a small but perfect diamond nestled among them. "I made this," Sullivan said quietly, "from the first gold we extracted from the new vein. The diamond came from my mother's ring, the one possession I kept from my previous life." Catherine stared at the ring, unable to speak as understanding dawned. "When I was trapped in that mine," Sullivan continued, his voice deepening with emotion, Facing the very real possibility that I might not survive, I found myself thinking not about gold or business prospects or even my own life. I thought about you, Catherine, about the chance we might never have to discover what could be between us. He took her hand gently. I'm not offering wealth or social position, though it seems I may have those things now despite never seeking them. I'm offering partnership, respect, and a love that began before gold ever entered the equation. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The simplicity and sincerity of his proposal brought tears to Catherine's eyes. This was no calculated business arrangement, no convenience of circumstance. This was a man who had seen her value when she had nothing to offer but herself. Yes, she whispered, finding her voice at last. Yes, I would be honored to be your wife, Liam Sullivan. His smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger was more precious than any gold. The band fit perfectly, as if it had been crafted specifically for her hand, which Catherine realized it had been. I should warn you, Sullivan said, his eyes twinkling with humor despite the emotion of the moment. Marrying a minor means accepting a certain amount of dirt and disorder in your life. I believe I can manage that, Catherine replied, her own smile breaking through happy tears, as long as the minor in question continues to respect Boston bookkeeping methods. Their laughter, shared in the small office surrounded by ledgers and invoices, sealed the moment in perfect joy. The news of their engagement spread through Prosperity Junction with predictable swiftness. By supper time, the boarding house dining room had become an impromptu celebration, with Mrs. Whittaker producing a bottle of blackberry wine she'd been saving for a special occasion, and Eleanor Palmer already discussing wedding dress possibilities. June would be perfect for a ceremony, Miss Winslow declared with uncharacteristic sentimentality. The wildflowers on Thunder Creek Ridge are spectacular then. And plenty of time to prepare properly, Mrs. Whittaker agreed. Though I expect you'll want to start work on that house right away, Mr. Sullivan. That cabin of yours is fine for minors, but hardly suitable for married life. Sullivan, who had been invited to join the celebratory supper, nodded agreeably. Plans are already drawn up. We'll begin construction next week on a proper home overlooking the creek. Catherine will have the final say on all details, of course. The mention of plans and futures prompted a round of questions about the couple's intentions after marriage. Would Catherine continue working at the Mercantile? Would they remain in Prosperity Junction or eventually move to Denver as the mining operation expanded? We haven't settled all those details yet, Catherine answered, touched by the genuine interest of these women who had become true friends in such a short time. But I expect I'll continue working in some capacity. I've grown rather fond of keeping accounts in order. Thunder Creek could certainly use your organizational skills, Sullivan added. Our record-keeping makes Hawkins's original system look positively meticulous. The gathering was interrupted by a knock at the boarding house door. Mrs. Whittaker excused herself to answer it, returning moments later with an unexpected visitor, Adelaide Blackwell, looking somewhat hesitant but determined. I apologize for intruding on your celebration, she said, her gaze taking in the festive table, but I wanted to offer my congratulations in person before we depart tomorrow. You're leaving Prosperity Junction? Catherine asked, rising to greet. Her Adelaide nodded. Father has business requiring his attention in Denver, and She hesitated, then continued with newfound confidence. I have decided to pursue studies at the Women's College in Boston, something I've wanted for years, but never had the courage to insist upon. The announcement clearly surprised everyone present. Adelaide Blackwell, the pampered daughter of wealth and privilege, choosing education over the expected path of advantageous marriage, was unprecedented. That's wonderful news, Catherine said warmly. Boston has excellent educational opportunities. For women, you'll thrive there, I'm certain. A genuine smile lit Adelaide's features. "Thank you, and thank you for our conversation earlier. It helped me see certain situations more clearly." She turned to Sullivan. "Congratulations, Mr. Sullivan, on both your engagement and the successful resolution of your business concerns. I want you to know that I had no knowledge of my father's tactics regarding Thunder Creek." "I never thought you did, Miss Blackwell," Sullivan assured her, "and I wish you every success in your studies." After Adelaide departed, the celebration continued, tempered now with reflection on the unexpected turns life could take. Catherine found herself pondering how a journey that had begun in rejection and uncertainty had led to such complete happiness. The following morning brought another surprise visitor to the Mercantile. Bartholomew Kensington himself appeared at Catherine's office door, his usual polished appearance slightly diminished, his expression uncharacteristically humble. "Miss Montgomery," he began stiffly, "I understand congratulations are in order." "Thank you, Mr. Kensington," Catherine replied, maintaining a professional courtesy despite their complicated history. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I also owe you an apology. My treatment of you upon your arrival was less than gentlemanly. I made judgments based on financial considerations rather than character, a mistake that has cost me considerably." The admission, clearly difficult for him, softened Catherine's lingering resentment. "We all make errors in judgment, Mr. Kensington. The measure of a person lies in how they respond to those errors." "Indeed," he hesitated, then continued with visible effort. "I've been offered a position with a banking firm in San Francisco. I'll be leaving Prosperity Junction at the end of the month. Before I go, I wanted to clear the air between us." "Consider." "It cleared," Catherine said simply. "I wish you well in your new position." A flicker of surprise crossed Kensington's face, as if he had expected recrimination rather than civility. "You're very gracious, Miss Montgomery. Sullivan is a fortunate man." After he departed, Catherine sat thinking about the strange, circular journey that had brought her to this moment. Had Kensington not rejected her, she would never have found employment at the Mercantile, never met Sullivan, never discovered her own resilience and worth independent of any man's validation. Sometimes, she reflected, what appears to be the worst moment of one's life becomes the turning point toward unexpected joy. 6 weeks later, on a perfect June morning with wildflowers carpeting the ridge above Thunder Creek, Catherine Montgomery became Catherine Sullivan in a ceremony attended by the entire community of Prosperity Junction. She wore a gown of cream-colored silk that Eleanor Palmer had worked on tirelessly, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs representing the mountain flowers that surrounded them. Sullivan, resplendent in a new suit crafted by Denver's finest tailor, watched her approach with an expression of such tender wonder that Catherine felt her heart might burst with happiness. Jack Thornton stood beside him as best man, while Clara served as Catherine's maid of honor. The vows they exchanged were simple but profound, crafted together during evening conversations on the porch of the boarding house. They spoke not only of love and fidelity, but of partnership and respect, of building a life based on mutual support and genuine understanding. "With this ring, I thee wed," Sullivan said, his voice steady as he placed a second band of Thunder Creek gold beside the engagement ring he had crafted. "Not as a chain to bind you, but as a symbol of the treasure I have found in you." "With this ring I thee wed," Catherine echoed, sliding a matching band onto his finger, "not as a claim to ownership, but as a promise of partnership in all things." Reverend Matthews beamed as he pronounced them husband and wife, his blessing nearly drowned out by the spontaneous applause that erupted from the gathered community. Even Mrs. Whittaker was seen dabbing suspiciously at her eyes, though she later insisted it was merely pollen from the abundant wildflowers. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with tables set up along the creek bank and lanterns hanging from the pines. There was music and dancing, feasting and laughter, the entire town sharing in the joy of a union that somehow felt like a victory for them all, a testament to the frontier spirit that valued character above circumstance, actions above origins. As twilight softened the mountain landscape, Sullivan led his bride away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. Below them, the foundations of their new home were already taking shape, solid stone rising from the earth in promise of permanence. "Happy, Mrs. Sullivan?" he asked, his arm around her waist as they watched the first stars appear. "Completely," Catherine replied, leaning into his embrace, "though I'm still adjusting to the name. Mrs. Sullivan, wife of a successful mine owner. Who would have imagined such a thing 6 months ago?" "I would have," he said with quiet certainty. "The moment I met you in that cramped office at Hawkins Mercantile, I recognized something rare and valuable. A heart of true gold, worth far more than any mineral wealth we might extract from these mountains." Catherine turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had seen her value when others had dismissed her worth. "Then we are both equally fortunate in our discoveries." Their kiss, shared beneath the vast canopy of Wyoming stars, sealed a partnership forged through rejection and resilience, discovery and devotion, a love as enduring as the mountains that witnessed its beginning, and as precious as the gold that had brought them together. In Prosperity Junction, they would later say that Catherine Montgomery had indeed become a queen, though not through wealth or station, but through the respect she commanded and the love she inspired. And Liam Sullivan, for all the gold his mines produced, would always declare that his greatest discovery was the woman who had traveled west seeking one future, only to find something far more valuable waiting where she least expected it. 4. Sometimes life's richest veins are found not in the ground beneath our feet, but in the hearts of those we meet along the way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.